So just a quick disclaimer, if you don't feel like watching the entire video, please skip to the end where I kind of list the pros and cons of this game, because there are cons, and I don't want to just sell this game as it's a perfect thing. I do want to address the problems with it, so like I said, if you can't make it all the way through, at least listen to the pros and cons, that way you don't have the wrong opinion. So when it comes to World War II in gaming, there's a lot of different options, whether it's a Battlefield or a Call of Duty game, Arma with mods, a strategy game like Call to Arms, the Men of War series, or even War Thunder. But one of my absolute favorite genres is FPSs. And two of the best games for this currently are Hell Let Loose and Post Scriptum, which has more accurately been renamed to Squad 44 because it's been picked up by Offworld Industries, who made Squad and the Starship Troopers game. The biggest differences between Hell Let Loose and Squad is that Hell Let Loose goes for more of a balance and quick gameplay, while as Squad goes for more team play and realistic qualities. And to help explain this and what I mean by this, Hell Let Loose favors things like a Tiger will do the same as a 76 Jumbo Sherman because they are both classified as heavy tanks, rather than the fact that a Tiger has an 88mm and the Sherman has a 76mm. This makes things have more of a health bar rather than an accurate damage system, with a 45 ACP 1911 having to take the same 3 shots as a 9mm Weither. And I've always been bothered by that. It doesn't completely ruin Hell Let Loose for me, but I've never gotten over the fact that a Russian PTRS anti-tank rifle can kill a fully armored Tiger from the front. That's why I personally favor Post Scriptum more as a historical, accurate, and realistic quality type game. While certain things like reload animations aren't quite right, or there might be a couple of weapons missing from your arsenal, it's also improved a lot in multiple other areas that Hell Let Loose hasn't. Some of these areas are sound design, like how the MP40 in Hell Let Loose sounds more like it's just bass, whereas the MP40 in Post Scriptum has that nice high pitch. Other things are like weapons having different fire rates, or fire mode for the fire rates, letting you switch from single to full auto, the ability to fix bayonets and deploy bipods for weapons that have bipods, unlike Hell Let Loose in its bar, and one of my favorite features is extra weapons in general, whether it's an anti-tank weapon or it's something like the rifle grenades. And I'm specifically mentioning this because one of my favorite things in this game is the fact that they included the correct animation for the M1 Grand's rifle grenade, because it needed a special bullet in order to actually fire the grenade, something they did go out of their way to include. In general, I just like Post Scriptum structuring a lot better when it comes to the way they've done their game, especially when it comes to their squad system. For example, the dedicated logistics section. So rather, instead of having a bunch of random engineers and support players, you'll actually have someone who is dedicated to running supplies and building up defenses. This makes for a much better structure because then people will actually utilize those defenses because that is their job. When you have it as a specified squad, that is more effective than having a random engineer who will never use those resources, mostly because he's just playing that class for the gun. Furthermore, the way Post Scriptum squads works is there are certain classes for certain battles. So if you're fighting as France in the early war, you might have a mortarman. However, if you're fighting as a paratrooper late war on the American side, you might have a couple of bar gunners as well as a sniper. But one of my personal favorite features is before you can unlock these extra roles, a squad must have at least 4 players before it starts unlocking roles. And personally, I like this because it doesn't lock certain weapons behind rank, it locks them behind players, and the reason why is so you can't just have 7 squads each with a single MG gunner. And don't get me wrong, I know there are going to be plenty of people who don't agree with this way of balancing, but personally I think it's a bit more of a unique idea. It makes it so you have field squads and actual coordination. It also reduces role spam in an effective way. And going back to the point I made earlier to where certain squads will have certain resources on maps, there are actually some offense maps to where certain squads won't have armor, while others will. An example of this is the Night Battle of Sainte-Marie-Église. If you play this game mode on offensive, then on the American side you will be para-dropped into the battle early morning of June 6, I believe. And I personally absolutely love this feature because there are very few games that are willing to touch on the historical accuracy of certain events like this. And naturally that's because people are going to get pissed off and they're going to really get into the game, especially with that imbalance. But believe me when I say that imbalance does not mean shit, depending on who you're playing with. And I say that because right after I got the footage of jumping out of the plane on the American side, I switched over to the Wehrmacht, and I joined the tank squad. And within just a couple of minutes, we managed to lose a Tiger due to its fuel tank catching on fire, which spread to the engine and then the ammo rack. We lost a Panther due to being tracked and then satchel charged in the middle of the city. We lost several scout cars, and even had a Panzer III recreate the scene of Fury, which I was doing because I was the gunner who was left alive. With that being said, I wanted to look a little bit more in-depth at the armor real quick, which is my absolute favorite aspect of this game. The armor is actually what drew me to it to begin with. For starters, there's a much wider variety in what you're given. Some things are tank destroyers, others are scout vehicles. It brings out a lot more of a wider variety, like things like the Stug and the Sherman Wolverine. On top of that, the way they work for their crew is much better, with the driver and hull gunners usually being able to poke their heads out of the hatch, allowing for better visibility. And this is something that a lot of games lack, which is kind of surprising. It's not every game, but it is one of my main gripes with Hell Let Loose. Especially after playing Post Scriptum for so long and then switching back to Hell Let Loose on a recent binge, Hell Let Loose's periscope is just way too claustrophobic, and it doesn't give you a wide enough view of what's around the tank. Being able to open the hatch is much better for gameplay in my opinion, because it gives you a wider view of what's happening while also putting you at risk. It makes you vulnerable to the outside world, which is a much more balanced version than having a periscope that's just situated on the tank that can see 360 anywhere. When it comes to the rest of the crew, the gunner is already 1,000 times better, with the ability to switch ammo types without actually having to eject the shell, not to mention the fact that they have multiple ammo types. This can range from things like smoke shells, high explosive, armor piercing, to armor piercing ballistic caps, and much more intricate shells. On top of that, once again, the gunner for most tanks is not limited to just the gun sight, but he actually has a periscope that he can use to move around the tank. And perhaps one of the most useful features is that for tanks that have a hull gun, you have a dedicated slot just for a hull gunner. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because not only does it allow you to have more friends inside of a tank, it gives you an extra body that you can throw out of the tank if you need to repair. And this is just a good way of giving an extra man, because they have something to do, not to mention they're expendable. And as for the driver, once again, not only do they have the ability to open up their hatches or use periscopes around the tank, it's actually much easier to drive the tanks in this game than in other games in my opinion. That is, if you have a decent understanding of how to upshift and downshift, and you know not to turn too much at high gears or you'll just kill your RPMs. As long as you have a basic understanding, driving is a lot more bearable in this game, and it makes it a lot more fun. And on a quick side note that I'd like to mention about their armor, which they mention in their armor rework video, which is in a title card just up on the right screen, cosmetics on the outside of certain tanks will actually affect not only shell ballistics, but how heavy the tank is. For example, spare armor parts and logs on the side of the EZ-8 will actually increase the weight, making it so it can't go up hills as easy as a regular Sherman. And on top of that, depending on the angle of which that Sherman is shot at, if it's shot from the front and the shell kind of hits those logs, the shell will not have as much of a penetration chance as if it hit it from the side, away from the logs. And then on top of all of that, certain shell types will actually affect how infantry on both the inside and outside of the tank are affected due to fragmentation. Shells like high explosive anti-tank will not only have a higher concussion effect on crew, it will have a much higher kill rate on internal crew and external infantry around the tank because of the fragmentation. Other shells, like high velocity armor piercing, will have a much higher chance of penetrating the tank, but will most likely not damage the crew unless hit directly. And once again, I have to mention this because it brings War Thunder kind of physics into a more immersive FPS game, which I absolutely love. And now to actually move on to the tank combat, rather than just raving about the tank combat. The way it works is, if you lose a tank, that tank is gone until the next round. Basically, both factions, or whichever faction is given armor at the beginning of the round, only has a certain set, so it could be 3 recon, 2 medium, and 1 heavy. This feature makes it so tank crews not only have to be a little bit more careful with what they're using, it makes it so you don't have an infinite risk of tanks, which also kind of helps with that imbalance from earlier. Tanks desperately need some sort of support, whether it's another tank right behind it or an entire infantry squad. And the reason this is because infantry will kill you. Whether it's a random sapper who has a satchel charge or it's an anti-tank who takes out your tracks. And that's one of my favorite things about this game, is the way the tank modules work. If you lose a track segment, you will not be moving until that's repaired or that tank is destroyed. And the amount of modules that can be destroyed are a lot wider. Things like the glass of the periscope on the outside of the tank can actually be shot out, preventing you from seeing unless you stick out of the hatch. Fuel tanks can be set on fire, engines can be set on fire or just taken out completely, tracks can be destroyed, the gun barrel can be destroyed, the gun mantlet can be destroyed, the elevation and horizontal drive can be destroyed. In the end, this makes it so even if that random German kid with a Panzerfaust doesn't actually kill you, all he has to do is hit your tank in the right spot, and that will severely cripple you. To me, this makes the gameplay a lot more intense than games like Hell Let Loose and, dare I mention, Heroes and Generals, which used more of a health bar system. For example, in Hell Let Loose, the only real threat you have if you're in a Tiger is if the anti-tank takes out your engine, because then you won't be dead, but you won't be able to move. And while the way Post Scriptum works is a health system, it's a much more intricate health system, with each individual module having their own health bar. This is a much more efficient way of simulating a tank because it makes it to where modules can take certain calibers a lot better and others can be destroyed in a single shot, like your ammo rack. With that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and segment into the infantry gameplay. So, quick interruption, I shit you not, halfway through recording this, I got a notification that they've just updated their game, and it's already changed so much shit. For example, here's a screenshot of some of the graphics optimizations that they've just done. On top of that, they've just added logistics for infantry squads, so now their regular trucks can also hold some supplies to build things like machine gun nests and mortars. So logistics still focuses mainly on forward observation bases and whatnot, but infantry can do it too. That's fucking amazing, because I literally just said that. Needless to say, Offworld Industries has already done more than prove themselves, because this is the second major update that they've done since they've taken over just a couple months ago, not even. They even added a Saving Private Ryan reference in the training ground where you take off your helmet and throw it. I fucking love this game. With that being said, I had to re-record most of the infantry because what I had said about it before had become outdated. So now I have a lot more footage of how logistics works, especially for regular infantry squads. Now, regular infantry have 600 supplies in their vehicles to use for building defenses and offense, however, they need to have an FOB radio within under 400 meters in order to build it. In a way, this kind of removes the uniqueness of the logistics section, basically essentially turning them into Amazon delivery drivers. However, I still like the way that they've structured it, because in the very least, you'll always have a dedicated logistics section. And on top of that, now you'll always have a way to supply the entire map without having to rely on a single squad. It's not completely overpowered because the infantry have less, but it works out better. They've also structured their vehicles for infantry a lot better, because instead of just having a transport, and that's basically it, they have things like regular transports, jeeps, armored transports, half-tracks, gun carriers, command vehicles, motorbikes, basically just a wider variety for infantry to get around and to support infantry. And just in case all of that isn't enough, there are static vehicles that you can drive, depending on what map. Things like a tractor. Fuck yeah. Yo. That shit.
Get him, man, get him!
Stop him! Stop him! Come on!
Hey, pull the fuck over.
Oh, no.
Tractor guy, you were a fucking badass. I love you. Essentially though, all these vehicles makes playing infantry a lot easier because you actually have something to support you that isn't a tank, and you can control it. Not only does this help support infantry, whether it's advancing on a point or just transporting them, it really boosts the morale and just like immersion goes straight up, and this is exact proof. On a quick side note there, it is statistically proven that the second you start playing music, you will die. Though realistically, that's just infantry. Infantry is full of death. The second you look away, your buds are gone. Infantry support trucks now get 600 supplies. Post Scriptum is a game to where you will die. You're not going to be able to run and gun like this is a Call of Duty game. You can be walking past a bush, you could be walking in the middle of your squad. Someone, somewhere, will put a bullet into your fucking chest cavity. And that's another thing that I like about this game. While you can survive shots and shrapnel, so if you get shot in your arm or your foot, you might be fine. Basically everything else, whether it's 45 ACP, 9mm, 7.92, or 30-06, will kill you. In another area, one of the biggest complaints of the game is the stamina system. When you run out of stamina, you won't be able to do things like holding your breath when aiming down sights, or you won't be able to run as fast. If you happen to get down, but a medic picks you back up, then you'll be completely out of stamina, and you'll have to take a sip from the canteen. Another disliked feature of this game is the way the rally system works. In order to place a regroup call, or a rally, you need to have at least 2 other infantry or 1 radio man standing beside you. This will allow your men to respawn on that rally for 5 minutes. And every 2.5 minutes, if you don't want to lose that rally, you have to refresh it either by spawning on it and refreshing it yourself, or by having the radio man refresh it. Alternative to having rallies, you also have FOBs, or forward observation bases, as well as mobile spawn points. FOBs can be built up using supplies and by building an FOB radio as of the most recent update. Either the FOB or the MSP have to be refreshed, however if they're destroyed, your team will not be able to spawn on them until they're replaced. When it comes to the communication in this game, it's a lot more enjoyable because people use their microphones. And that made this whole recording session a hell of a lot easier on me mentally because I actually enjoyed playing this game while I was doing it. You have a lieutenant chevron on your helmet, but you have fucking sergeant on your arms. What is this? Are you sergeant, lieutenant, sergeant? Hey, you, hey, fucker, I want your hat. Give me your hat. Give me your hat.
Whoa.
Give me your hat.
Give
me your hat. Give me your hat. You know what? Fuck this. I'm going into the sewer like an actual Frenchman.
Like an actual Frenchman.
Don't go in the sewer. Don't go in the sewer. They're here. It's a great idea. This is a great fucking idea. Get out of the sewer. I dropped it. TNT's dead.
Well, considering
Get away from the sewer. There's TNT. Get away.
Well, it was nice.
And I won't lie, personally, I absolutely love when you get a kill in this game because it feels a hell of a lot more powerful than when you kill someone in Battlefield or Hell Let Loose. Killing people in this game takes a lot more precision and accuracy and concentration, and when you kill someone, you did that, you got the kill, so it's always an amazing feeling.
Yeah, you're fucking them up.
Yeah, fuck them guys. And on one final note, they also have workshop mods, so your game can have multiple factions like Russia or Britain during the African campaign. And if I remember correctly, they do seasonal events. I'm not sure if they'll carry on doing them, but I know back in 2022 they did the Zombies update, which was a limited time game mode to where the Germans would be zombies and the Americans would have to defend points from undead hordes of players. So now that I've raved about the game for about 5 hours, only for you it's about 17 minutes with editing, it's time that I go ahead and show off some of the cons and the bad sides of this game and compare it with Hell Let Loose in how this game is actually worse. For starters, this game is heavily reliant on communication. If you don't have communication, you will lose. So in that aspect, you need good coordination, and I can completely understand why some people would be turned off by that, because then it doesn't make it to where if you have to go or you have to do something, it's not as easy. In games like Battlefield and Hell Let Loose, it doesn't feel as rude and it doesn't feel as required that you have absolute perfect communication. I'm not saying that you don't need communication or that communication doesn't help in those games, but it's not really required. Both of those games are types of games that just require a basic mindset of attack the point and don't stop attacking until the enemy is gone. When you're playing Post Scriptum, the matches are typically drawn out a lot longer, so people don't want to leave mid-match, and I can completely understand why that would be a bad factor. Another bad aspect is actually just some of the bugs that I've already shown in this video. Something like the bayonet glitch, to where my bayonet went straight through that German soldier, and I had to shoot him, which gave away my location. This is unfortunately a glitch that has been around for a while. I didn't know about it until that exact moment. Other glitches, however, are simply when you're just driving a truck through a road and you start to sputter out and flip on absolutely nothing. Or alternatively, and more hysterically, you'll hit something so fast that you just go flying through the air. Shit, we are flying. Other things can be questionable hitboxes and bullet physics, like right here where I shoot at this driver clearly poking out of his hatch and it does nothing to him. And another one that I can commonly understand is the graphics. The graphics are all pretty bright and colorful, which makes it seem almost animated. It's a lot better than it was back in the day, because back then it was almost on a rainbow color type palette, but it is still pretty bright and colorful. Personally, I don't mind things being a little bit more defined, especially because it helps me identify enemies. However, I can understand why people would mind this. And the gripe I was also seeing literally in the chat during the Omaha recording I was getting was mostly about how the graphics in general aren't that good. And I can understand that. Personally, I don't mind the graphics. I don't think graphics make a game infinitely better or infinitely worse, and this is a personal bias. I've always thought the graphics here are much better than Hell Let Loose, but that's mostly because for me, I'm able to see enemies at 80 meters plus in Post Scriptum, but in Hell Let Loose, if they're 80 meters, while I will still see them, they'll appear as pixelated blobs. Now, I'm not going to get into a debate about graphics, but this is one of the things I've heard, and I can see how it would bother people. Another one of the biggest things in this game is the stamina system. One of the biggest things in this game is people will say that it tries to be too realistic, and one of the main examples they'll use is the stamina system. And while I can understand that it is aggravating to have to constantly take out your canteen and drink from it just to get a little bit of stamina back, personally, I've always thought that this con was a bit over-exaggerated. You don't have to take it every 3 steps. When it comes to people saying that Post Scriptum doesn't have to be realistic, I would like to counter with the fact that that's what Post Scriptum tries to appeal to. One of the main things of their game is it's a lot more realistic than most games. And I'm not saying that it's a perfect simulation, but I'm saying it tries to have a little bit more complex systems, even if they are aggravating. And I personally can appreciate this, especially because I recently bought a Kar 98, and when I held that gun, I realized just how heavy that damn rifle is. And I personally like how this game makes it where you can run a considerable distance carrying all that weight before you need to take a break to get your stamina back up. It helps reduce the Call of Duty run and gun mentality because it limits you from being able to do that, and it makes it so you aren't a super soldier who can run 1,000 meters without breaking a bead of sweat. And the reason I'm talking so much specifically on the stamina system is because it kind of is a 2-for-1. The stamina system also goes into the realism aspect, and I really just wanted to push the point that this game will lean more towards realistic qualities than balance and more simple game aspects. And I'm pushing that just to make sure that it sticks with you. This is a bigger, more hardcore simulation than Hell Let Loose. Naturally, if a player is trying to play a simple, more arcadey, or just a quick match of a game, they're not going to want something like Post Scriptum. However, that doesn't mean that that game individually is bad, it just means that it's not as good for a certain type of playstyle. Which for Post Scriptum, that is a bit more of a realistic, accurate take on World War II, while Hell Let Loose is a bit more balanced and arcadey, which is easier for more people. Anyways, I'll put that rant aside and I'll go ahead and move on with the video about some of the other things. One of those things being how this game literally just came back from the dead. As personally biased in favor of this game as I am, I'm not going to lie that this game did die for basically the entire duration of 2023, with only one server being up about every day or so. The main reason for this was funding issues, so the previous dev team couldn't carry on with their game. However, on top of that, the player base was mostly going to Hell Let Loose. Aside from the con that I talked about earlier, where Hell Let Loose is a simpler game to get into, Hell Let Loose had a lot of advertisement back then, and I remember this because I saw 4 or 5 ads where, for Post Scriptum, I only saw it when Steam recommended it to me. Nowadays, Post Scriptum on average reaches a 1,000 player peak per day, which isn't horrible, but for most people, that's also not optimal. On top of this, Hell Let Loose having gone to crossplay and being on Game Pass now has a lot more servers because you have PC and Xbox. Because of this, you won't be able to find as many servers in Post Scriptum, as well as many good servers with ping that fits your region. However, personally, I don't think this is too big of a deal, especially with Offworld Industries taking over Post Scriptum, which, you know, again, they own Squad. Not only will they have more than enough funding to keep developing the game, I feel like because Offworld Industries picked up Post Scriptum, it's going to get a bigger player base sooner or later. With all that being said, I highly recommend that you do get Post Scriptum if you're wanting a more realistic FPS and one that requires a lot of team-based and coordination. And I'd highly recommend getting it before February 7th if you're thinking about it, or just while it's on sale in general, because currently it's on sale from 30 USD to 22.40 USD. I would highly recommend looking at other videos about this if you aren't sure, especially because I'm not going to lie, my personal thoughts on this game are heavily biased. This is a perfect game for me, but I can understand exactly why this wouldn't be a perfect game for plenty of other people. If you happen to see this video, however, and you went and picked up Post Scriptum and you actually enjoy it, then please let me know, because I love it when people see my videos and then actually take my recommendations and it turns out they enjoy it. I'd also like to thank basically everyone who I met during recording this. Like I said, this was a very enjoyable experience, but thank you to people like Von Christopher and his friend. I would also like to thank the guy who helped me get the periscope footage of the tank getting shot out. He didn't ask to be credited directly, however, he was part of 44th, and that wasn't the 44th server, so I will say thank you to the 44th community for letting me do that. And if you are looking to join a regiment for a game like this, or Hell Let Loose, I believe they're in Hell Let Loose, then definitely look up the 44th, they're pretty chill guys. And basically, just one last thing to Von Christopher and everyone else I saw during the recording days that I was doing this, there were a lot of great moments that I caught during this, and I plan on doing a sort of compilation video of Post Scriptum because there was just too much good shit to pass up. So don't worry, you'll have more screen time, Von Christopher, you amazing bastard, I love you. And also to the crazy guy who drove a giant tractor into a Panther tank, that shit was hysterical. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and maybe subscribing, because I plan on doing more like this. I think the next game I'm going to try to cover, to give an alternative, is Hell Let Loose, because as much as I like Post Scriptum, I also do want to cover the alternative. Even though I know by now plenty of people know about that game, fuck it, it's content, so, you know. Regardless though, thank you for watching. Let me know if you picked up Post Scriptum and if you enjoyed it, and hey, if any of you noticed yourself in this video, whether it's Von Christopher or just some random, let me know. It's fun. I like meeting people on YouTube that I met in game. And one final note, tell me what you think about this outro, because my friend Nicodemus made this GIF for me after I gave him a model for Blender, and I absolutely love it.